via YouTube and Europe by satellite. The links to the footage are included in the invite you received, and all media can use the footage free of charge. I'm now giving the floor to Emma Cook, the Executive Director of EMA. Mrs. Cook, please.
Thank you very much, Marion. Yes, it's really a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our final press briefing of 2021, but it's also a very important anniversary. It's exactly 1 year since the approval of the first COVID-19 vaccine on 21st of December 2020. So when I made this announcement last year, I really didn't expect that 1 year on we'd still be in a pandemic. But as you all know, the epidemiological situation remains extremely worrying across Europe. There are still high levels of transmission of the Delta variant, but we're also seeing that Omicron has become the dominant variant in a growing number of countries. But today I want to focus on three main messages. With 5 vaccines and 6 treatments, we're in a stronger position than this time last year. We have many more tools at our disposal. From a regulatory perspective, we are prepared in case there is a need to change the existing vaccines or therapeutics. And thirdly, irrespective of whatever data will support the need for such a change, the priority now must be to increase vaccine uptake, increase booster uptake, and continue to increase supply. Now, at the end of this year, I wanted to take a moment to pay tribute to the dedication of our experts and to my own staff who have helped to make this happen. It has been a relentless year for all of us, and they have worked extremely hard to ensure that EU citizens can have access to these vaccines and therapeutics. Vaccines remain the key tool in our fight against the virus, and we now have 5 vaccines against COVID-19 authorized in the EU. The 5th, Nuxobovid, was authorized only yesterday, and 4 more vaccines are under rolling review, and I cannot stress enough the importance of vaccination. Although we're seeing increased transmission of the virus, all the data show that the authorized vaccines help to protect us from death, severe disease, and hospitalization. With real-world evidence that effectiveness wanes over time, boosters are increasingly important. And I'm glad to say that for 3 of the authorized vaccines, we have been able to give recommendations on boosters. And we've also supplemented these recommendations with findings from academic and other studies on mix and match approaches. And these studies show that the use of 2 different COVID-19 vaccines for initial courses and boosters in general confers at least as much, and in some cases even more, protection as compared with when the same vaccine is used. This important work was done together with the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, with whom we're working increasingly closely all the time. Now, it's also becoming increasingly clear that young children can suffer severe consequences from COVID, and one of the mRNA vaccines is now authorized for use in children. Both are already authorized for use in adolescents, and the similar review for the second mRNA vaccine in children is ongoing. In addition, and again very importantly, we've worked tirelessly to help companies to increase their manufacturing capacity. And these efforts have resulted in the distribution of almost 1 billion doses of vaccines within the EU and the export of more than 1.3 billion doses to countries outside the EU. Just to go back to where we were in the first quarter of this year, there was only approved capacity to manufacture 100 million doses. Now we're in a position to manufacture 300 million doses in Europe each month. So capacity has gone up at least tenfold, and this upward trend can and must continue. Increasing supply means that we can support global access in addition to European access. The other good news is that we now have 6 treatments for COVID-19 in the EU, and this includes 2 medicines, Kineret and Xevudy, that were recommended for approval by EMA's Human Medicines Committee, the CHMP, last week. This brings us in line with what the European Commission expected as part of its strategy on COVID-19 therapeutics. None of these medicines is a magic bullet, but every single one is a welcome addition to our toolbox and gives us hope and possibilities. Now, let me talk about preparation. Omicron is at the forefront of everyone's minds. A virus with significant changes in the spike protein, emerging evidence of increased transmissibility and ability to escape vaccines and prior infection. But we, as regulators, we're well aware that viruses mutate, and this is a situation that we are prepared for from a regulatory perspective. We put in guidance in place for industry back in February of this year, and this maps out the steps that companies need to take to change their vaccine should that become necessary. And again, what studies they would need to adapt vaccines quickly. The legislation has also been changed to allow for a very speedy evaluation process. Now, let me stress, there's no answer yet on whether we will need an adapted vaccine with a different composition to tackle this or any other emerging variant. We need to see more data on the impact of the variant on the effectiveness of the approved vaccines, as well as to gather further evidence on the transmissibility, the disease burden, a more granular impact on vaccine effectiveness, including against mild disease, severe disease, hospitalization, and death. All options should be explored, including monovalent and multivalent vaccines, and how these would perform relative to either a primary series or a booster dose of the existing vaccine. These are all still open questions, but what we do know is that we will not have to start from scratch because of our prior knowledge. Our priority is to be prepared in case there is a need for such a change. Again, let me stress, this is not yet the case. Now, a decision on a strain change will, of course, have to be taken in a coordinated and global way. And we, as regulators, will be part of this discussion, and we will contribute with our knowledge and expertise. But in the end, it has to be a joint decision. Speaking of joint decisions, Omicron highlights yet again the need for international collaboration. And in my role as chair of the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, or ICMRA, I have asked for a workshop with international regulators to take place the beginning of January to discuss the topic further and to ensure global alignment. I'd also like to touch on the safety of COVID vaccines, which remains very reassuring. COVID-19 is the largest vaccination campaign ever, with nearly 700 million doses already administered in the EU. And the scale of the ongoing global vaccination campaigns mean that we already have more information on the safety of COVID-19 vaccines than we did for many other vaccines. Before I finish my brief introduction, I'd like to talk about some of the other ways that the pandemic has affected EMA. While we have delivered on COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics, I'm also proud to say that we've delivered in many other areas. This year, we have recommended 92 medicines for human use for approval, including a first-in-class treatment for women with an aggressive form of breast cancer, and also the first cell-based gene therapy to treat multiple myeloma. In the veterinary area, we've recommended 12 new medicines for approval. We're also on target to deliver on the implementation of two major legislative tasks, the Veterinary Medicines Regulation and the Clinical Trials Information System, which supports the go-live of the Clinical Trials Regulation. Go-live for both pieces of legislation will be at the end of January 2022. Now, I should also mention that the pandemic has also had a fundamental impact on our legal foundation, because we will soon have a new mandate. The European Commission, the European Parliament and the Council have recognised the active role that EMA is playing during the pandemic, and we will shortly have a new mandate that formalises some of the activities that we have been carrying out during the pandemic. For example, in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw extreme shortages of medicines across the EU, and EMA coordinated across the medicines regulatory network to address situations where life-saving ICU medicines were no longer available. We will shortly have an explicit mandate in this regard. Another example is our COVID-19 EMA Pandemic Task Force, or ETF, which brings together the necessary expertise from the network to discuss all aspects of medicines regulation. This group was foreseen in our pandemic plan, but it will now be formalized next year. So let me come back to my three messages. We have more tools now than we've ever had before. We are ready for any changes that might need to happen to address the Omicron variant. And increasing vaccination now, both of primary series and boosters, will help prevent severe disease and death. With those messages, I would like to pass the virtual microphone to Marco Cavalieri, the chair of our current ETF, who will walk you through some of the latest developments with regard to vaccines and medicines. Before I do this, I just want to take a minute to thank Marco for his leadership and strategic vision. I can safely say that we wouldn't be in the situation we are in today in Europe without his leadership and dedication. Over to you, Marco. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emer, and good afternoon to everyone. Before we move on to your question, I would like to give you an overview of our most recent approvals for the treatment and prevention of COVID-19. As Emer already mentioned yesterday, the Human Medicine Committee, the CHMP, recommended the authorization of Novavax COVID-19 vaccine, Nuvaxovid, in people aged 18 years and older. Together with the already authorized vaccine, this protein-based vaccine will support vaccination campaigns in the EU member states during a crucial phase of the pandemic. Nuvaxovid contains tiny particles composed of the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, so to resemble the actual virus. It also contains an adjuvant, a substance to help strengthen the immune responses to the vaccine. This is based on a saponi, which is a product derived from the bark of a tree. This is the first COVID-19 vaccine that we approved that is based on a more traditional technology, which has already been used for other vaccines, such as for influenza. Like for the previous COVID-19 vaccine, the assessment of this vaccine has proceeded under an accelerated timeline, and we have recommended granting a conditional marketing authorization that will be valid in the European Union following the decision by the European Commission. The studies that were assessed for the approval recommendation involved over 45,000 people in total. Around 60% of the participants received the vaccine, and the others were given a placebo. Taking together, the results of the two pivotal trials show a vaccine efficacy for Nuvaxovid of around 90%. The original strain of SARS-CoV-2 and some variants of concern, such as the Alpha, were the most common viral strains circulating when the studies were ongoing. A small study in South Africa was also conducted when Beta variant was predominant and showed that the vaccine is protective against symptomatic infection, even if at somehow at lower levels at around 60%. There is currently no data available on the efficacy of Nuvaxovid against Omicron, while for Delta, the data available is too limited to predict exactly the level of protection that can be retained, which is anyway expected to be consistent with what we're seeing with other variants such as Alpha, so rather reassuring overall. The side effects observed with Nuvaxovid were usually mild or moderate and clear within a couple of days after vaccination. The most common ones were tenderness or pain at the injection site, tiredness, muscle pain, headache, a general feeling of being unwell, joint pain, nausea, or vomiting. As for all vaccine, the safety and effectiveness will continue to be monitored as it's used across the EU through the EU pharmacovigilance system and additional studies conducted by the company and by European authorities. We are very pleased to add this vaccine to the array of available immunizations. Not only does it widen the choice for people who want to get vaccinated, but this vaccine will also be easier to handle thereby facilitating the rollout in vaccination campaigns, especially in countries where maintenance of continuous cold chains are more difficult to achieve. This can be done due to the possibility of storing the vaccine at normal fridge temperatures. Moreover, this vaccine will deliver very large amount of doses, approximately 1 billion per year, to the COVAX program that will help ensuring that the world is vaccinated as soon as possible. In addition to the 5 vaccines, new treatments for COVID-19 are now available. Xevudy, which is sotrovimab, received a positive opinion from the CHMP last week. Xevudy is a monoclonal antibody intended for people with COVID-19 who do not require supplemental oxygen and who are at increased risk of disease becoming severe. Xevudy acts as an antiviral by neutralizing the virus by attaching to the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2, which is what the virus uses to enter the human cells. It is administered as a single dose by intravenous infusion. The safety profile of Xevudy was favorable in the clinical studies, and the CHMP concluded that the medicine benefits are greater than its risks for the approved use. The medicine has already been in use in EU member states, as the committee had provided advice to member states to enable them to already make use of this therapy while the evaluation of the marketing authorization application was still ongoing. One additional good news is that Xevudy maintains the ability of neutralizing several variants of concerns, including Omicron, and therefore represents a valuable tool to limit the burden of disease that is caused by this new variant. 2 more medicines received a positive opinion from the committee to extend their indication in relation to the treatment of COVID-19, which are Kineret and Veklury. Kineret, which is anakinra, is an immunosuppressive medicine that is already authorized in the EU for the treatment of various inflammatory conditions. The CHMP recommended adding to its approved indication the treatment of COVID-19 in adult patients with pneumonia requiring supplemental low or high flow oxygen and who are at risk of developing severe respiratory failure. Its use is driven by increased level of a specific biomarker of inflammation in patients with COVID-19 not yet mechanically ventilated. Veklury, which is remdesivir, as you know, is an antiviral medicine that has been authorized for the treatment of patients with COVID-19 who have pneumonia and require supplemental oxygen since July 2020. Now, the CHMP has recommended adding to its indications of use the treatment of adults who do not require supplemental oxygen and who are at increased risk of progressing to severe COVID-19. For such indication of use, a 3-day treatment course by intravenous administration is envisaged. Also, the CHMP has issued advice on the use of the oral antiviral Paxlovid for the treatment of COVID-19 ahead of its authorization. Paxlovid acts on another viral target, which is a protease, which is an essential protein for viral assembly and spread of infection. Paxlovid can be used to treat adults with COVID-19 who do not require supplemental oxygen and who are at increased risk of progressing to severe disease. In parallel, a more comprehensive rolling review started already on the 13th of December this year. Finally, EMA is reviewing new data on the effectiveness of Lagevrio, which is molnupiravir, another oral antiviral medicine that reduces the ability of SARS-CoV-2 to multiply in the body. EMA has already issued interim recommendation to support national authorities who may decide to use Lagevrio for the treatment of COVID-19 prior to the marketing authorization of this medicine. The recently available final results of the main clinical studies are showing an efficacy lower than initially seen. This data will be reviewed in the coming weeks to determine if a positive opinion can be reached next year. I will stop here for any question you may have. Thank you.
Many thanks to both of you, Emer Cook and Marco Cavalieri. We will now take questions from the floor. So, dear colleagues from the media, please turn on your camera if you want to ask a question and click on the respective icon at the bottom of the WebEx window to raise your hand. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be enabled and you can ask your question. So the first question today comes from Maria Psara from Greek newspaper Efsin. Maria, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the floor as well. Maria Psara with Star TV Greece. 2 questions, if I may. We were expecting to know more information on Omicron 2 weeks after the first cases. from what we know now, will people who already have a booster shot need to have a new jab on April with a COVID vaccine updated for Omicron? And do you see vaccination being the new normal for us every 6 months or so? And my second question, Christmas is the time when families come together. What would you recommend for the members of a family that would like to meet, as Omicron is spreading around Europe? Do you think that a self-test is necessary, or what else should we do when we meet our beloved ones? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And perhaps we start with the second part of your question on the meetings with families, which I'm going to give to Ima Cook. Ima.
Yes, and I think we're all worried about the effect of the old and new variant on our families. And this is an area where I'm in a lot of discussions with scientific advisors across Europe. And I have to say there's not one single remedy that I could propose. And you will see that different countries, taking into account their own situations, have recommended different strategies. So what I would say is, depending on where you're living, please do follow the advice of your local authority or government.
Thank you very much. The first part of the question, which is more information on Omicron and whether we will need a new jab of vaccination now more frequently, goes to Marco. Marco, please.
Yeah, indeed, we are starting receiving important data with respect to the ability of the sera from vaccinated people or previously infected people to neutralize Omicron. And you have seen that these data are showing that indeed there is a drop in the ability of the vaccine to exert good neutralization for Omicron, but nevertheless, it will look like a booster shot of the vaccine that we have is providing good cross-neutralization. And the other important elements that are emerging based on real-world evidence is that a booster dose is indeed able to restore a quite high level of protection from symptomatic disease. We are still missing information with respect to the protection from severe disease, even after 2 doses, as this might be retained to a certain extent, and will be extremely important that we collect this evidence before really we have the full picture around what we can expect in the future and what the vaccines that we currently have are able to do. So for that, we will have to wait a few more weeks. As you know, Omicron is spreading quite rapidly across different parts of the world, including Europe, and we will be seeing more data emerging in terms of real-world evidence about the effectiveness of the current vaccine, either before or after the booster, in terms of the different outcomes. So not only symptomatic infection, but also hospitalization and severe disease, and also infection. And based on that, it will be clearer where we're going with this and what could be the next step. So for now, we have to be prudent, but still we have to start thinking about developing vaccines on the variants, such as Omicron, so that in case it turns out that we really need to move into a new vaccination using a variant vaccine, we will be prepared. And that's exactly what we're doing. So it's very difficult to say, returning to your question, whether in April we will be in the condition really to recommend already an Omicron variant booster or additional doses. And then what will be the new normal, we don't know yet. This virus is still in a pandemic phase and might be changing quite abruptly all of a sudden in the near future. So we have to be prepared to see this virus changing over time until it will find a good position and living within the human community. But it might take a while. In any case, we have to be prepared, and we have all the tools that would enable us to give an answer and to provide vaccines that will be effective. Whether we will end up in a scenario similar like influenza is possible, but at this point in time is not certain.
Thank you very much. I now take a question from Helen Collis from Politico. Helen.
Thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, on the Novavax opinion yesterday, This is the first time that Novavax has developed, manufactured or launched a vaccine. Were there any concerns about whether or not the biotech could deliver the vaccine of a consistently high quality for every batch in the EMA's assessment? And I'm wondering how the company has been able to demonstrate it can meet these high standards routinely in manufacturing billions of doses for COVAX, Europe and the world. A question on Moderna as well, if I can. Moderna released data yesterday on its booster dose, showing that its booster does increase neutralising antibodies against Omicron, but also the full dose of the vaccine, which is used in the primary course, has much higher response. Can you tell me if the EMA is going to be looking at the higher dose of the Moderna vaccine as a booster? And I was wondering if you can finally update us on the antivirals, on when we might expect full marketing authorization or conditional marketing authorization for either of these, given that not all countries will be able to use them until this is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think all three questions go to Marco Cavalieri. It's on Novavax and the concerns regarding quality, then Moderna, and then also the full marketing authorization for antivirals. Marco, please go ahead.
Yeah, so starting with Novavax, indeed, the manufacturing aspect is the reason essentially why it has taken a bit longer than expected to come up with a conditional marketing authorization. And also importantly, the conditional marketing authorization is mainly relying on the fact that it's conditional is because there are some aspects related to the manufacturing that are still work in progress in a way, so we need to fine-tune them in order to align with the standard that we normally require for a standard authorization. And that's the reason why we're going with a conditional authorization. But at the same time, the benefit risk is considered positive for the manufacturing side that have been approved at this moment in time. And we do believe that the batches that are coming out right now are of good quality and will exert the same level of safety and efficacy that we're seeing in the clinical trials. To your second question about Moderna, we have seen this data and we will be discussing with the company whether indeed a full dose might be a better choice than the half dose that is currently approved, taking into account also aspect of safety as well. So this discussion will take place in the coming weeks. And with respect to the antivirals, as you know, we came out with this scientific opinion in order to support member states' potential use of these antivirals as emergency use, as they can do at national level. But at the same time, we will progress very rapidly also with the authorization process. And we really hope that at the beginning of next year, we will be able to conclude for both the oral antivirals.
Thank you very much. I'm now taking a question from Victoria English from MedNew. Victoria, please.
Yes, this is a question for Dr. Cavalieri, and it concerns the antivirals. Can you clarify the amount of time during which these antivirals are effective if you want to prevent severe disease? I thought I read that it was something like 7 to 8 days, but I may be wrong. The reason I'm asking this is that would this be any limitation to their use in developing countries? That would be the first question, sub-question. And then the second sub-question is, does this mean that diagnostics are going to be even more important as we roll out the antivirals as they are with the vaccines?
Thank you very much. Marco, can you please respond?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that these antivirals, and we know this already from other antivirals, they are effective if they are used rapidly once symptoms are emerging. Because if you wait too long, then the impact that they will have will be diminishing. So it's important that they are used as soon as possible, and indeed they have been studied also with some rigorous criteria, like within 5 days or 7 days from onset of symptoms, in order to maximize the chances of seeing efficacy for these oral antiviral. So it's very important that they are used in a timely way. And of course, after there is a confirmation by diagnostics that there is the infection indeed is caused by SARS-CoV-2 and not other pathogens. So this is definitely something that will be important to consider in the implementation phase in countries, and to consider then how can they be used in the best way possible in order to maximize the chances that they will be effective.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Alizé Vincent from Cosette. Alizé, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My question concerns the potential links between the vaccines and menstrual troubles that women experienced. I wanted to know, what do we know about this potential link between the vaccines and menstrual troubles? And is there anything women can do before their booster dose to prevent these possible menstrual troubles? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give this question to Dr. Georgi Genov.
Thank you very much for the question. It's an important question. There are a number of related aspects that I would like to touch on. So with regards to menstrual disorders, we are aware of media interest, concerns, questions, and we've been following very closely. We have received reports, and our safety committee has looked at those reports. Those relate to a variety of different types of disturbances of menstrual disorders, missed periods, heavier periods, etc. At this stage, there is no pattern, and we are not able to establish any link to these menstrual disorders, possibly influenced by vaccination or COVID-19 vaccines. That being said, it is challenging, based on reports, for something that is as common and can be influenced by many other factors to establish or refute causal association. There are emerging studies, and these are important, including this morning there was a publication by the Norwegian Health Institute that has studied 6,000 women 18 to 30 years old, indicating that there could be some heavier periods post-vaccination. Now, further studies will be needed where we measure hormone levels, etc., to fully determine that. I think the key point is, with regards to menstrual disorders, is what we have seen in our reports and the emerging studies, that these are transient. So they would resolve. So I think that's important. It's important also to consider if there's any extended bleeding or anything that is unusual. People should seek medical attention. That relates post-vaccination, but also, in any other circumstances. And two other points I would like to touch, because concerns regarding menstrual disorders often are linked to questions with regards to fertility. On that, we don't have any data for any vaccine, and certainly not for COVID-19 vaccines in question here, that there will be any influence on the fertility on women and men. And I think even more importantly, often these concerns are related to people that would like to become pregnant. And it's important to know that pregnant women are at increased risk of severe outcomes when it comes to COVID, both in terms of hospital admissions, ICU admissions, ventilator use, and death. And there is an emerging data indicating that also pregnancy outcome could be negatively influenced by COVID-19. Many health authorities have put pregnant women on their priority vaccination list, and that is fully justified. Emerging data on safety of mRNA vaccines, predominantly used in pregnant women, are very reassuring, and our scientific committees are currently looking at all this evidence. But certainly, mRNA vaccines used in the second and the third trimester seem to have reassuring safety profile and to be efficacious. So I think it's really, really important to highlight that pregnant women should be vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now taking a question of Johan Montet from Belgian Radio. Johan, please.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. My question is, could nasal spray vaccines be a complement to prevent transmission of the virus? And what is the status of the research? Is there any rolling review about nasal spray vaccines? My camera doesn't work, sorry.
Thank you very much. Marco, this is a question for you, I think.
This is indeed a very interesting area of research, and of course there is the important factor here that vaccine that are given nasally will act directly on the mucosa and will confer potentially good mucosal immunity that will have an impact also on infection and transmission. So it's quite logical to think about this type of approaches. The reality, however, is that there are few candidates in the pipeline, but are still in very early phases. Some will be entering phase 1 studies soon, but we are very far from having vaccines that have demonstrated indeed to elicit a good immune response and can be progressed to later stages of clinical development. Nevertheless, we do support research in this area, and we look forward to discussing with developers about the way forward and how we can make sure that any of this type of vaccine can be progressed rapidly.
Thank you very much. We now have a question from Susie Ring from Bloomberg. Susie, the floor is yours.
Hi there. I just wanted to pick up on the previous comments about pregnancy. You mentioned that it's clear mRNA vaccines are safe in the 2nd and 3rd trimester. I think there's been some problem with messaging around an absence of information on the 1st trimester. Can you just clarify for the audience the reason you're not including the 1st trimester is because there's a lack of data on that group at the moment, not because there's any concern that you shouldn't have a vaccine in the 1st trimester?
Dr. Genov?
No, thank you. Indeed. Most of the data that we're currently reviewing relates to use of mRNA vaccines in the 2nd and the 3rd trimester. Now, there is more limited use in the 1st trimester, and that's the only reason to highlight where most of the data is, but that we don't have any concerns in the 1st trimester. It's just for completeness. And thanks very much for the clarifying question. Very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was the last question from an accredited journalist, so I'm closing today's press briefing. Thank you very much for your questions and for attending this press briefing. And also a big thank you to all my colleagues who participated today. Please note that the first regular press briefing next year is going to take place on Tuesday, 11 January, and you receive invitations in the new year. I also want to thank all of you for your important work and for the good collaboration during this public health crisis. During the upcoming holiday season, EMA will continue to work on COVID-19 related issues, but otherwise the agency will be closed until 4 January. I wish all of you a very happy Christmas and hope that you all will get some well-deserved rest. Thank you very much and goodbye.